So, on the topic of popular memes that are going around, one of the ones that I've seen a lot, and I'm sure you've probably seen it too, is this one that is some variation on your grandfathers were called to war to save the world. We are being called to sit on our couches and stay home to save the world. Let's not screw this up. And while that is true, and a very clever statement, the downside of that argument is I just don't see in 20 years there being an entire film genre dedicated to our generation's brave struggle to sit on the couch, play video games till our thumbs bleed, and watch terrible Netflix shows. Because the war movie just has so much more over that. And especially the World War II film, because nothing in history, especially artistically, has ever seemed to fascinate, horrify, and inspire us as much as World War II. You know, you sometimes will see historians or, historical fiction about what would happen if World War II had never come to pass. And all interesting things to think about, but what I always kind of focus on is what would the entertainment industry have been like without World War II? I mean, it made up such a huge chunk of content, from movies, books, television shows. The History Channel as we know it probably wouldn't have existed without World War II. I was never a big fan of war movies. I love films and stuff about the time period, not so much about the war itself. You have to look at my grandfathers and my father for that, but I think there's two reasons why World War II really sticks out in our head. Number one, it's one of the only wars in history that could almost have been written by Hollywood. You know who the bad guys are, and you know who the good guys are. And for the most part, I know there was actually, there were not a lot of people who were going, oh yeah, we shouldn't have bothered with that Hitler guy. We should have just let that go. We had no right being there. In most cases, unless you're an asshole, you're saying that. No, he needed his shit fucked up. Sorry. Not sorry at all. But I think the other reason is because it just seems like there is an endless supply of fascinating stories of bravery and courage and inspiration to be mined from this, because it really was the story of ordinary people. I mean, other wars have had this too, but it really feels like that one's been the narrative of just ordinary people going and doing extraordinary things. So as I said, I'm not a huge war movie buff, but when I see one that really clicks with me, it stays there for a long time, and that was the case. And I was only a kid when this came out, but that is the case with 1990's The Memphis Belle. This one has stayed with me for quite a while. For a while, it was a regular view for Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Partly because my grandfather on my mother's side, my grandfather in Verso, he wasn't one of the Memphis Belle, but he actually was one of the ball turret operators on one of these B-17s. So, it has that kind of family connection. I remember seeing this movie as a kid and really falling in love with the humor of it, the adventure of it. I feel like I'm talking a little bit too much about it like it's the Three Musketeers, but it really is framed, especially from a young kid's point of view, in this kind of adventure film genre of, this could be you could go and do these extraordinary things. But as you get older, of course, and you rewatch it, you realize, yes, it is saying that, but the message it's saying is that it's not really this grand adventure. It was a bunch of guys doing the job that they felt they had to do in the best way that they could. So let's talk about this film a bit. So the movie itself is based on true events. I'm not a historian, so I don't know if the names or anything are the same. I don't believe they are. But it's a fictionalized telling of the last mission of the B-17 plane, the Memphis Belle, in 1943. The Memphis Belle being a very famous plane from the war because it was the first one to complete its tour of duty, to go and fulfill all of its missions, and its crew were able to be discharged and go home. So this is telling the story of that last mission, before they get to go home. And of course, it's the most dangerous one they've ever been on. They're bombing a site in Germany. So the stakes are really high and the odds of survival are not great. I mean, according to the little bit of history I read and the little bit that the film provides, I mean, there was no safe job in World War II, so I'm not trying to make that statement. But the Air Corps and these guys in these planes, the fatality rate of them was monstrously high. So the odds you were coming back if you were one of these guys was pretty slim. So you can kind of see it on the characters and on the way everybody reacts to them. And that is kind of one of the great things about this movie is you've got the characters themselves who are pretty grounded, but they're getting a little bit of a swelled chest. They've survived all this, so they're starting to think of themselves as these kind of heroes. And everybody else is kind of looking at them as these heroes. You have a couple of characters who are not being fooled by the grandeur and kind of the attention. And as the film goes, each of them kind of, again, is faced with the reality of the situation. They're not immortal. They're not, some kind of god. They're men. They're basic men, and a lot of them, like I say, not much older than, late teens, early 20s. I think you can only really talk about this movie by talking about the cast. It is a superb cast. The characters themselves are fairly broadly drawn. We're not given a whole lot about them outside of kind of their basic war movie archetype. You've got the singer, you've got the religious one, you've got the guy who just wants to go home and marry his gal, you've got the young kid. Again, nothing really breaking the mold, but characters you can immediately identify. You know what film I actually think this is the closest related to is not a war movie, but 12 Angry Men. If for no other reason than that famous scene in 12 Angry Men when Henry Fonda, Lee J. Cobb, and Jack Klugman have to go man a B-17 and bomb Germany. But mainly because that film, like this one, was a haven for character actors. And the emphasis was on characters that were just broadly drawn, but at the same time just specific enough that you really could see yourself as one of them. It's a movie about the everyman. And again, the characters are drawn so broadly, but still with enough specifics to make them individuals, so that you, the audience, can see yourself or someone you know in those characters. And it works really, really well. And I think that's partly due to the writing, and it's partly due to the casting. Getting washed out again here, I'm sorry. But anyway, partly due to the casting. The cast is phenomenal, but it is a cast of side actors. You know, not a lot of these guys are big names. Some of them had some name recognition when this came out. Guys like Matthew Modine and Eric Stoltz, D.B. Sweeney a little bit, Billy Zane a little bit, you know. But, you know, Tate Donovan, Reed Diamond, Courtney Gaines, none of these guys are name above the title actors. You know, nobody's really suiting up and going, ooh, can't wait for that new Tate Donovan movie to come out. And this is not a knock against any of them. This is not a criticism. Because first of all these guys have had long careers that are still going. They are reliable hands, each one of them. But again, it plays to the strength of the piece. It's an ensemble piece about the everyman. You don't want a John Wayne character in this. You can't have that one guy who's bigger than everybody else. You know, oh, John Wayne and Mel Gibson are going to go win the war for us. You know, you can't have that. You need this group of guys who are identifiable. You recognize them. But again, I don't want to say bland. That's not the right word. But unassuming enough that, again, you can see yourself in them, or you can see someone you know in them. And the cast is great, you know. Again, some of these guys would go on to some decent success. Billy Zane. Billy Zane fits really well, at least at this age, into that, I don't know, that 1940s look. He's got the slick back hair. He's got the little thin mustache. He fits really well into it. D.B. Sweeney, making his second appearance on Forgotten Gems, plays the navigator who's convinced that his luck has run out and that he's gonna die, and he's just so paranoid about this mission. Harry Connick Jr. is the tail gunner and is this kind of old country boy who happens to sing and play the piano really well. Oh, what a stretch for Harry Connick Jr. But really, this was one of his first acting gigs. It would lead to a pretty decent career, both singing and acting for him. I love Harry Connick Jr. as both a singer and a performer. Reed Diamond, who you probably don't recognize the name, but if you've ever seen a Joss Whedon film, he was on Dollhouse. He was in Whedon's Much Ado About Nothing. He was on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Is in this as the guy they nicknamed the Virgin for reasons. Sean Astin, post Mikey, pre Samwise Gummy Bears. You know, in that weird kind of teenage, or I don't know how old he really was during this. He must have been close to the age of the character as Rascal, the kind of pompous, you know, loudmouth teenager who thinks he's God's gift to everything. But yeah, just again, a really, really strong group of characters and actors to pull it off. One thing I love about this movie is that it's how engaging it is. It's very easy to get sucked into the world and the atmosphere. I actually watched this over a course of 2 nights. I started it one night, but it was getting late and I was getting tired and I wanted to enjoy it. So I stopped, but it was really hard for me to bring myself to do that. Because like, oh, I really like this part. Oh, this part's coming up. Oh, I really like this part, you know, and all that. The world it sets up is a nice mixture of a kind of romanticized view. Everything's very pretty and whatnot, but also of a very real view. You really do feel, I don't know how authentic it is. I wasn't there. But it feels authentic to me, just the atmosphere that they set up of life on this Army base, like it's a big frat house, for both good or ill, however you want to define that, and the kind of camaraderie that springs up from that, the good-natured ribbing. These do feel like guys who have lived together, bunked together, have irritations with each other, but when the chips are down, they're going to come through for each other. So and a lot of that is in the intangibles. A lot of that is just in the atmosphere that's been set up, and all that. It also feels very authentic being in the plane. They filmed it in an actual plane. So much so that one of the things I read said the director actually couldn't be in there with them. He could only view them via monitor and had to radio orders to them or, instructions to them over headsets because he couldn't get in the plane because they had, and you really get the feel of what it must have been like to be on one of those planes. The battle scenes are maybe one of the only weak spots of it, is that the battle scenes are very choppy in terms of the editing and kind of all over the place with machine guns and dialogue. I guess but I think that is more from someone who has gotten used to over choreographed action scenes. And again, I think what they were aiming for was to show you just how chaotic it was up there, and how we're all used to World War II video games or flight simulators. You get the crosshairs and you line it up perfectly and you take them down and all that. But really, you're just up there kind of just shooting at the breeze and hoping to hell you hit something. Especially when you're aiming at, attack planes that are much smaller. So, the battle scenes are not the best. I think they are in keeping with the themes and the feel of the film, so I think they work. So one of the other things about this movie, and I remember when I was a kid, I thought this was kind of callous, but I like how it throws in little touches, again, about life on an Army base or on an Air Force base at that time. And one of the constants in a situation like that is the presence of death. People going out and not coming back, and it's something they're dealing with every day. And what's interesting is how it shows the different ways these guys dealt with it. At the very beginning of the film, one of the planes coming back from a mission blows up on the runway. And the next scene, the guys are all going through the guy's foot locker to make sure there's nothing embarrassing that's going to go back to his wife, and they're kind of divvying up things like candy bars and whatnot like that. And you're like, wow, that's really kind of callous, isn't it? During the battle scene, one of the planes gets shot down, and they start talking about a joke that one of the guys on that plane that just got shot down had told them the night before. So they don't spend a lot of time really mourning, at least not in the traditional way. Of course, these are 40s men, so they wouldn't spend that much time, I guess, stereotypically. But it doesn't shy away from the fact death is a constant in their world and how they deal with it. They're one of the best scenes in this movie. So there's the cast is made up of the crew of the Memphis Belle, but there's also two officers. One of them played by David Strathairn, who is such a steady hand with character actor. You've probably seen him in something before. He's got a very distinctive, very deep voice, very clear speaker, very authoritative. If you've seen the two recent Godzilla movies, he's in those. He's the general in those films. But he plays the colonel in charge of the Air Force base, and John Lithgow, making his second appearance on Forgotten Gems, is playing a Army PR officer, and he's looking to turn the Memphis Belle into a big PR firm. He wants it to come back and, parade the boys around, make them heroes, make people buy more bonds, blah, blah, blah. So there's this constant push and pull between the two of them The one going, these guys need to do their job, and the one's going, no, they're celebrities, and kind of filling their heads with all that. And there's a scene in this where John Lithgow's character says, oh, you don't care if these guys live or die. You're just trying to get planes in the air. You don't care. So David Strathairn takes him into his office and dumps out this whole drawer of letters that he's gotten from families of people who have lost loved ones that he wrote to and that have written back to him. He says, here, start with this one about from a father who had his son's head blown off. You read that one first. And it's this little montage of, you know, people reading these letters to him about people they lost, and, you know, families, you know, dealing with the loss of a father, brother, husband, or son. And that's kind of the most emotional the film gets, and it's a big punch. And that scene is accompanied with, I'm assuming it's archival footage, because it doesn't look like anything else in the movie. It's but archival footage of planes being shot down, and because I know they had documentarians and whatnot on some of those planes. You know, a couple filmmakers were on a few of them during the war. It's like a real iceberg challenge, or whatever they call ice bucket challenge, right in the middle of the movie. Because again, they've been dealing with death in not so much a cavalier way, but in a very kind of this is what happens kind of way. And that scene right in the middle, kind of marking the beginning of either Act 2 or Act 3, is a real tonal shift going, no, look how serious this shit really is. And it's a really good scene, and one I'm not ashamed to say brings a tear to my eye every time I watch it. I also got to talk about the special effects are pretty good for this time period. The green screening is pretty consistent. The model work is really well done. It's really hard to tell where they're using real planes and where they're using models in this. It's really, really well done. And I'm especially in awe of the scenes where they've got a bunch of these big ass planes taking off or, you know, gearing up, because you know that's not CGI. They had to get those fucking planes, you know, or they're models, and they're doing a really great job. Because so yeah. When it comes to the is this movie perfect thing, there is really nothing I can point a finger at and say this marks it down or this is a point against it. I would say maybe some of the performances aren't perfect. I think Matthew Modine and Tate Donovan aren't as solid as some of the other characters. But I think for a war movie, I think this is probably one of the best war movies ever. I really can't come up with anything that detracts from it or feels out of place or anything. I mean, the closest I could get when I was watching it was, yeah, the fight scene, the battle scenes are a little choppy. But again, I think that's part of the point. So I can't think of anything to really detract me from recommending this film very heavily. I think if you are a fan of war movies and you haven't seen this one, then you're definitely missing out. You need to check it out. And I think that even if you don't like war movies, because I really don't like war movies. I'm not a big fan of World War II movies for the most part, but this is one I really, really dig. So I think it's good enough that it kind of reaches across those boundaries, and maybe even if you're not a big fan of war films, give this one a look. And I think there's something there for everybody. So yeah. Always a pleasure to revisit the Memphis Belle. So I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everyone is staying happy and healthy and taking care of themselves and their loved ones. We're going to get through this together. So as they would say, Keep calm and soldier on. And as always, drive safe, and I'll see you at the movies.